you ever get the feeling television isn't what it used to be?
So no.
Brexit means Brexit.
We had to take a compulsory course called Combat Propaganda.
Boris Johnson once declared that his life's ambition was to be king of the world.
Does Yevgeny Lebedev have any connection with the Russian spy machine? Well, yes.
Find deeply offensive. Where is the evidence?
I don't care if they find it offensive.
The fundamental problem with Facebook is that it is accountable to no one.
The government was advised to invest money in the NHS. The government aren't listening to the evidence.
The kind of world I want to bring my child into.
Hello, it's Friday night with Byline Times. I'm Hardeep Matharu, and over the next hour we'll be bringing you what the papers don't say and what the TV doesn't tell you. Now, Peter Jukes is usually in the main presenter's chair, but due to a clash of schedules, he can't be with us tonight, although he will be back for next week's show. And thankfully, I've got Byline Times writer and disinformation and tech expert Kyle Taylor with me tonight.
Hello.
Hello, Kyle. Good to have you back.
Big shoes to fill, but I'm happy to be here.
Of course, very big shoes to fill. Coming up on tonight's show, I'm going to be talking to the Labour MP Dawn Butler about controversial developments in Parliament this week, the ongoing impact of the murder of Sarah Everard, and what it was like questioning Dominic Cummings. Kyle will also be telling us much more about his book, which has been launched today, The Little Black Book of Data and Democracy. But first of all, Kyle, we're going to take a look at today's digital front page for Byline Times. It's
what a week.
Yeah, full of stories about women's rights, misogyny, clamping down on protest, the ongoing culture wars. Everyone's becoming obsessed with flags in this country. Islamophobia being institutionalized. Where do we start this week? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's so your fantastic piece is probably the place to start. It was absolutely brilliant, and I think really framed the issue in a way that is helpful in moving the debate forward. People really understanding how these things fit together. And I think from the front page, you know, the really interesting story just yesterday was a Byline Investigates piece that has now been picked up by the New York Times and other news outlets about how the Sun is still paying for information that was collected illegally to write stories, in this case, once again, about Meghan Markle.
Yeah, I mean, the last time you were on the show, we were talking a lot about Meghan. I think that was before Harry and Meghan's interview with Oprah Winfrey. But what was really interesting about that, and we touched on it last time, was this nexus between the royals, the tabloids, this culture of fear that exists. They're dependent on each other. And I guess a lot of the practices that were uncovered in the phone hacking scandal of, 10 years ago, I mean, this new report by Byline Investigates shows that kind of digging is still going on.
Well,
right?
And it shows how we really haven't gotten anywhere with this, right? So the out at the end of the Leveson inquiry was that, you know what, we shouldn't make this statutory. We'll just use sticks and carrots to try and get newspapers to follow the rules. But what do we know? They don't follow the rules because they're not incentivized to. And my worry is that we're going to see the same thing with big tech now. You know, a big push, huge inquiry, all the evidence in the world, and then, let's hope they just do it for us. And for me, that's just not good enough.
We're going to be discussing a lot more of that, which I'm really looking forward to. It's been another important week in terms of the discussion of women's rights and misogyny. We obviously had the passing or the announcement that misogyny will be a hate crime, and lots more discussion around the murder of Sarah Everard and the tragic circumstances of it, and the impact that's had, and perhaps the uncomfortable questions that needs to be discussed. I'll be talking to Dawn Butler in just a few minutes about all of this, but first let's take a look at her discussing lots of these issues in the Women's Day debate in Parliament this week.
Madam Deputy Speaker, every 16 minutes a woman or a girl is abused, and every 3 days a woman is killed by a man. We heard the list read out by the member for Birmingham and Yardley. This is a crisis that we have to get to the root of. Inequality in society is fueling the killing of women. The bullying and silencing of women's voices contributes to the abuse that women receive. If a man was killed every 3 days, there would be investigations at every level of society. But unfortunately, every level of society, a man still holds the power. whether it be economically, politically, or within the media or the judicial system. One woman is killed every 3 days. But ask yourself this, what are we really doing about it? It is time for all those with power to stop being bystanders in this pandemic and get involved. Just yesterday we read about Sarah Everard, who it seems has been sadly killed. The suspect is a policeman that roamed the corridors of Parliament. I now have made a Freedom of Information request to establish how many police officers have been investigated for domestic violence. And I recognise journalist Alexandra Heel, who won a Paul Footer Prize for uncovering the shocking stories of how police forces handle domestic abuse complaints against their own officers. Justice for Women highlighted the injustices faced by women who kill abusive partners. Why are so many women charged with murder as opposed to manslaughter if there is strong evidence of domestic violence? It is because predominantly men are making the judgments. In the recent case of Anthony Williams, sentenced to 5 years in jail for strangling his wife to death, she had her keys in her hand as she was trying to escape. Judge Paul Thomas said, in his view, Williams' mental health was severely affected at this time. This is ridiculous. In 2019, Judge Hayden said, I cannot think of any more obviously fundamental human right than a right of a man to have sex with his wife. Really, Justice Hayden? How about the fundamental right to life, or the fundamental right to say no? Lord Justice Burnett said that the small number of sexism cases in courts gives a false impression. I say that all sexism in courts must be eradicated and judges removed. We need more men tackling male violence against women. We need judges to be barred if they are not to be understand that any violence against women and girls is wrong. I welcome Baroness Hellick's amendment to the domestic abuse bill, and I hope that the Minister will say that the government will support this amendment. We need to challenge and interrupt abuse at every level in society. So today I challenge to challenge the judiciary. The pool from which judges are drawn are too narrow. Retention of women are dismal because of the abuse they suffer at every stage. Our judiciary is poorly served because of the misogyny and discrimination. We ultimately need a more wider pool if we are going to change the culture and structure. Let's start with 3 Ps: prevent, protect and prosecute. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Dawn, thank you so much for joining us tonight. So, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill passed by MPs this week. For some, this was yet another sign of an increasingly authoritarian, hard-right government. What were the most concerning aspects about this legislation for you?
I mean, what a bill. I mean, it was crazy to think that our government is eroding people's rights. You know, the very core of our democracy. You know, that our government's saying, well, actually, you're not going to be allowed to protest no matter what we do to you as a people, as a society. Or if you do protest, you can't do it too loudly. I mean, what is a protest if you're not going to be able to voice your opinion?
On noise.
Absolutely.
Right?
So it's like, don't disturb us. We are going to dictate to you, be completely dictatorial to you, and you can't say anything about it. So that was quite frightening, but it's fundamental to from the moment that Boris Johnson has been Prime Minister, he's deliberately tried to erode our democracy. You know, I thought Brexit was about taking back power. You know, what is that about? And I think that we are blindly going into this, and this Police and Crime Commission Bill was a part of that. I mean, it passed its first stage, but it seems as though the government now, because of protests, because people took to the streets, because people made noise and didn't listen, exactly the thing that government was trying to stop people from doing, they've now changed their minds, and we could possibly see a U-turn on this.
There's a really quite amazing clip doing the rounds on social media, the Conservative MP who stood up in Parliament in favour of this bill, obviously, and said, well, my office looks right onto Parliament Square. I don't want to have protests there all the time. They're really disturbing. They're noisy.
It's inconvenient, isn't it? It's inconvenient. People rising up and saying, well, actually, we don't want you to curb our rights. We don't want you to stop and search. We don't want you to disrespect women. We don't want you to penalise disabled people. It's inconvenient. But do you know what? It's that inconvenience that makes the difference and makes changes. At the end of the day, you know, I think as Martin Luther King said, the riot is the voice of the unheard. You know, people don't protest because things are going well. They protest because things need to be said and the people in power are not hearing them. That's why people protest.
And so therefore it's, from what you're saying, it's quite telling that the government has chosen this area to sort of crack down on. Why do you think, what is the wider context this fits into though? Why are they doing this now and this in particular?
I think they've obviously done polling, right? And, you know, apparently Priti Patel is very popular amongst the Conservative membership. And, you know, I heard, and this could just be a rumour, but I heard, you know, if they've done some polling and, you know, if they were to say, would you bring back hanging in the country, people would say yes. So they think, oh, let's go along this line because it's very popular. But I actually think that people are better than that. So they may be doing their polling and they may think that people are in favour of these draconian measures. But I think ultimately what happens is the more it goes down, so what happens is they say, right, okay, let's criminalise black people. They'll be like, oh yeah, okay, fine, it's all right, you know, it's just black people. Let's criminalise X people. Oh yeah, it's so fine. But as it goes lower and lower down, you think, oh my God, you're coming for my rights. You know that famous poem? You know, I didn't speak up because I wasn't Jewish. I didn't speak up because I wasn't trade unionist. I think as people realise it's infringing on their own rights as an individual, then you think, hang on a minute, I'm not okay with this.
It's really interesting because the debate around Brexit was very much about, you know, the other from without, you know, people coming from Turkey, people coming from the EU and sort of invading this country. And now that sort of notion has moved to activist lawyers, historians, you know, people wanting to protest, sort of left-wing protest movements. It has expanded in the way you say. I mean, something that caught a lot of headlines about this bill was this notion of statues and monuments being given new protection under the bill. And people, you know, some commentators making the comparison that actually the starting tariffs, when it comes to imprisonment for defacing a monument, is more than some sexual offences. I mean, what do you make of all of these discussions about flags and statues and Churchill, and is this a distraction? I mean, is this what do people really care about it in the country?
Well, I read a report from the United Nations, I think maybe 2 years ago, and it talked about populist nationalist governments and what they do and how they do it. And this is exactly what they do. I mean, this is Trump playbook 101. It's exactly what they do. It's not a surprise. When you read through it, I was like, oh my God, you know, photo ID to vote. So some people are like, well, haven't you got photo ID? You think, well, I may have, but other people will not have. And who are the people who haven't got photo ID? All of these little things that on the surface might seem very simple is actually part of a very dark road that this government is deliberately going down. So if we're not alert to it, I mean, I've raised it. I moved a 10-minute rule bill in Parliament in regards to Parliament having scrutiny on what this government's doing, because we haven't got scrutiny. Remember, people forget, you know, Boris Johnson's government closed down Parliament and got overruled by the courts. People forget that. It's like, don't forget everything that's been happening. They're throwing things at us really quick, really fast, but ultimately they have one aim and one goal, and that's for them to hold on to power and for nobody else to have a say or have any scrutiny. I'm elected by my constituents, and so are the other 650 MPs, and it's a dereliction of our duty not to hold this government to account.
And how does one do that? How does one combat these, you know, attacks on all fronts, as you call it?
Yeah, it's not easy because there's so much stuff that's been thrown at us that you can't read it all. You know, you can't keep on top of it. You just can't. It's almost impossible, and that's deliberate. You know, sort of, it's like blinding you with. It's not science, but it's like kind of blinding you with draconian, you know, legislation, so that you can't see the wood for the trees. And what we have to do is keep holding them to account every step of the way. You know, we need people out there who are doing the research, you know, Liberty and all of the other organisations and groups, you know, Sisters Uncut, everybody. We need everybody to take a little bit and say, this is what this government's doing and this is why we're saying no to it.
Yeah, I mean, those civil society organisations really coming together and finding allyship
Absolutely.
with each other seems to be more
and it's where we
important
need
than
to
ever.
go as society. You know, we need allies in every walk of society. And right now, if we want to save our democracy in our country, we need all of our allies to work together.
Looking at the impact of the tragic murder of Sarah Everard, I think we saw sort of obviously that continuing this week. Kyle very kindly was referring to an article that I had written for Byline Times at the start of the show. And I was really posing the question that why is it that Sarah Everard's murder seems to have reached a tipping point or managed to unite a lot of people in grief and sadness and anger when the violent deaths of other women have not. So 41 women have been killed by a male suspect so far this year. And last year we had the case of Nicole Smallman and her sister Bieber Henry, who were found murdered in a Wembley park. And in the aftermath of the deaths, it emerged that 2 Met police officers were under investigation for potentially taking inappropriate images at the murder scene. Their mother at the time said that when the girls were reported missing, the Met police hadn't taken that seriously enough because they made assumptions about these women, that they were black women living in council estates. How do we start to have these conversations, Dawn, about why is it that Sarah Everard's murder captures public attention in a way that Nicole Smallman and Bieber Henry's didn't?
Yeah, so your article was extremely powerful. And when I read it, I thought, so that's the conversation that we need to be having, that people are not having. And part of the reason is because it is uncomfortable and it's facing some uncomfortable truths. And
what do you think that uncomfortable truth is?
Well, the fact is that Bieber and Nicole are black women and they were brutally murdered, stabbed to death. And not only did the police not take it seriously in the beginning, so much so that Nicole's boyfriend went looking for them and he found them. That even after, when the police were tasked with securing the place where they were killed, they took pictures of their dead bodies and posted it on a WhatsApp group. And this hardly made the news. And you think to yourself, I mean, I visited Friant Park this morning and laid flowers for Bieber and Nicole. And you think to yourself, how could this not have made the news? How could something so tragic not have made the 2 sisters celebrating a birthday? They had a right to be in the park, celebrate a birthday. They had a right to be wherever they wanted to be. They were together, celebrating. They had a right not to be murdered, and they had a right to be respected after their death. And that didn't happen, and by the very people who were supposed to protect them. And Sarah Everard's murder affected me really badly, and it affected a lot of female MPs really badly as well. And I think partly because the person who's been arrested is a police officer. And, you know, there's lots of female MPs kind of virtually hugging each other, you know, like it's almost like a support group. And so it's affected us really badly. And I couldn't understand, I mean, I didn't really sleep for a couple of evenings, and I couldn't really piece it all together myself. So I understood some of the stuff that we can't talk about, for legal reasons. So I understood that that was playing on my mind. And then I realised that actually the deaths of Bibba and Nicole was also playing on my mind. And why wasn't that a turning point? You know, why didn't we have marches for them to the park? Why didn't we call out the fact that there's these apparently dark WhatsApp groups going on in the Met Police? And it is scary to talk about. I mean, I know it's scary to talk about, but I tell you this, I've had serving police officers contact me anonymously, telling me about stuff. And I actually don't know what to do with it. Because it's
the culture of the
yeah, and it's a scary thing to even contemplate. And there are some really good police officers, and they put their lives on the line every day to protect us. And I've got a very good working relationship with my borough commander. All of my borough commanders have had very good working relationship. And I think the really good police officers in the police force are also struggling. I think they're struggling, and I think they're looking for an outlet to speak. It's a troubling time that we're in, but I think it's a time where people need to be brave enough to speak out. If we are going to change the culture, if we are going to change systemic, institutionalized systems for the better, then people need to speak out, and we need to protect them when they do speak out.
And I guess it's also about widening the conversation that people are having now. I mean, one of the things I found striking was the Clapham Common vigil, those scenes of police officers, you know, dragging women away, and were really hard to watch. And I guess
there's no emotional intelligence in that policing operation at all. And the thing is with that is, the government and the police say it was a public health duty, but it wasn't. Because the scientists have said quite clearly, and this is from the SAGE papers, quite clearly, that outdoor events now do not cause a spike in infection. So, you know, we have to ask ourselves, we cannot police our way out of this pandemic. So let's not use this as an excuse to say, you know, if you really wanted to help public health and help curb the spread of the virus, then they could have given out masks and hand sanitizers. That would have done a better job of protecting public health than policing those women and arresting them and handcuffing them.
Do you hope that the behaviour of the police, that everyone saw the pictures on the front pages towards the women, do you hope that that will get society in a wider sense talking about police brutality towards, well, disproportionately, we know, people of colour? I mean, that conversation surely, well, we hope, will become part of this wider conversation that has opened up in recent weeks about the police and its culture.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. I had somebody emailing me and said, you know, we were over-policed that evening, and I agreed. I said, absolutely, you were over-policed for one evening. Black people have been over-policed their whole entire lives. So I hope that we work together, that we all work together to fight the injustices that happens every day in society. And it's the same like with the men and the hashtag not all men. I understood that. I understood how like men were feeling, you know, in terms of why are we all being judged a certain way? We're not all like that. I understand that. Of course you're not all like that. But black men are judged that way every time they walk out of their house if they're wearing a hoodie. So I think as we started this conversation, open up the uncomfortable conversations that has to be had in society, and that is what we have to do. And I think it will be honouring the brutal and unjust murders of women. A woman is killed every 3 days by a man. generally by a partner or former partner, but every 3 days a woman is killed. And we don't have the conversations to stop that happening. We don't have the conversations to make sure that when a woman comes forward, whether she's being harassed or raped, that she's taken seriously. We don't have the conversations about the judges who should no longer be judges because of their judgment. And we need to have those conversations.
Absolutely. Also this week, you were questioning Dominic Cummings, which I thought I'd ask you about because he's always an interesting character with our audience.
He really is.
So you were, as part of the Science and Technology Parliamentary Committee, he appeared before. What did you make of him? Did you find it illuminating, Dawn? Did you get to the bottom of Dominic Cummings?
So you know what, Hardy? I actually read his blog. You know, his blog is actually fascinating. Like,
Really?
yeah, like the way he writes and stuff. I was just reading it thinking, this is it is really fascinating. Not that, I agree with him, but it was a fascinating read. And I think that's important.
Yeah, both things can be true.
Yeah, both things can be true. So what was it like questioning him? He obviously loves it, right? He's kind of like a performer. So he obviously loved it and he thought through what he was going to say. It was interesting. I was very interested when I asked him about eugenics because and he's like, I don't know what you mean. And I thought, don't lie, you know exactly what I mean because you talk about it all the time. You've written articles about it. But it's quite important. But the thing is, we don't get a lot of time to do a deep dive or investigate or come back. So, I had a very short period of time, I could only answer a couple of questions. But I thought his response was quite illuminating. And I couldn't quite get from it whether he wants ARIA to continue or not, which is the new government body that's going to get £800 for research into science and technology. And let me say this, we do need to invest more in science and technology in our country. We are way behind. We are 20 years behind China. We've had to take out Huawei out of our 5G systems. We are 20 years behind. So we need to put a lot more investment in. But how that's done is very important. Because if we don't have transparency, we have to have trust. And right now we haven't quite got trust. So I think it was very important. And obviously there was a thing about his pay. It's quite interesting that he thought that through. He said, well, I took a pay cut and then he got a pay rise. Great, but it's also very interesting that he had a conversation with the Prime Minister in his front room, just him and the Prime Minister. Maybe he wasn't the Prime Minister then, he wasn't yet appointed as Prime, but he was going to be Prime Minister. So it's quite interesting, isn't it, that those kind of conversations that we always know that happens.
Yeah.
The old boys club, we know they have conversations before. We know they've got the job before being interviewed. You didn't discuss how much you were going to get paid, and then you went in and interfered to ask for a pay cut. Well, that's a privilege. I mean, as a trade unionist, I think you get paid for the rate for the job, and I truly believe that. So, I mean, there's a lot to unpick. But
and he was
it's
kind
fascinating.
Yeah, and
he's
he's kind of hinting that he's willing to lift the lid. I mean, he said the Department of Health, it was a smoking ruin, what happened with the contracts handed out for the coronavirus crisis. And he was sort of, hinting that he wants to, well, he said, didn't he? Anytime
he's
you guys want me back.
He's loving it. He's loving the drama. This is theatre. I mean, we haven't had theatre for a while. We've been in lockdown. This is like proper theatre, so he's absolutely loving it. Yeah. So, I mean, who knows? We're going to have him back. I think it's it's in May. Is it the 23rd of May? I can't remember. But he's going to be coming back to committee, and it will be probably joint committee. And I think he will do 3 or 4 hours, and he will completely love it. But what I don't know if he's doing it as a favour to distract the to distract everything that's going on in the government, so they can try and slip something else through the back door. As we said earlier, you've got to be so on your guard with what this government's doing. We could be getting excited in answering, asking him all these questions, and then, the government will come up with another draconian bit of legislation. I mean, the Coronavirus Act, we're going to be voting on that on Thursday. I'm going to be voting against. I voted against it in September. Only 6 other Labour MPs voted against it. I'm going to be voting against it again because these are draconian, unchecked powers that, we don't need. So I don't know. Or is he really doing it because he wants to throw Hancock or whoever under the bus. Let's wait and see.
Yeah, the story continues, doesn't it?
The theatre of it all.
Oh, Dawn, thank you so much. It's been so nice to talk to you. And Kyle is going to be back talking a bit more with Dawn about data and democracy. But before we do that, let's take a clip of the abuse that women politicians, and especially black women politicians, face as an everyday occurrence.
Last week, Labour MP Dawn Butler announced her constituency office was having to close due to an escalation in threats of violence and racist abuse against her. Some of the shocking details of the experience of her and her staff were shared in an op-ed written by Butler, published in the Metro on Saturday. Butler said, travelling alone from Parliament, often late at night on quiet tube carriages, is really scary. I often try to disguise my appearance through fear of being recognised. The person who attacked me went to prison. I would like to thank the members of public that came to my aid that day. And this is really shocking. So this was something that was in the Observer on the weekend. I think this is maybe the most shocking part of the whole story, actually. So she says there, I raised all this with Parliament and I was told that the abuse I was receiving wasn't enough to warrant any special security measures. I was really nervous about travelling and anxious about taking public transport after that attack. How much abuse do I have to get before it was enough?
And so then when you have high profile black women knowing everything that black women go through in terms of misogynoir, they become, heightened targets for this kind of abuse. Diane Abbott received over half of all abusive tweets sent to MPs during the 2017 election. And it's because black women, as Malcolm X famously said, the most unprotected, disrespected woman in America is the black woman. Well, I think that's pretty true for the UK as well.
Back. I have the task of filling in for Hardeep Space. We still have Dawn Butler with us. So excited to have you to talk about these particular issues around tech, data, and democracy. You were telling me in the break that you actually were a coder. Is that right?
Yeah. I used to program C++, COBOL.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you understand the sort of infrastructure and the architecture of this stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've tried to pull out in the book is how online spaces, we sort of think of them as somehow separate or very different than the real world. But in actual fact, what ends up happening is they mirror whatever behavior happens in the real world. And what we see in the real world, right, is far more harm to black people and minorities, women. How have you experienced that both online and offline as a black woman and a black woman in a position of power?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard because the abuse is just constant. If I tweet something, people would just be abusive, even if it's something like really simple. People would just find something to be abusive about that, and I think it's systemic of where we are sort of in society, that people think they can just get at you. But I also think that those people who are abusive online are more likely to be abusive offline. So we need to take it seriously. Because I say one woman every 3 days is killed by a partner or former partner. That means there's a lot of abusive men around. So they're not just hiding away. They are there and they're showing us who they are.
Well, and of course, your role on the committee deals a lot with the sort of AI, artificial intelligence, in the context of tech. How do we approach this? What do we need to do to understand that simply handing the power to an algorithm isn't going to change anything?
No, I mean, an algorithm doesn't just manifest itself from nowhere, right? It's built by people. And it's built based on data. And the reason why most algorithms don't work, because they have biases inbuilt in them from the moment they are created. because you don't have neutral data. You're not building it from scratch. So that's why, like, a lot of the algorithms that the police were using, they don't work because they are built on biases, inbuilt systemic institutional biases. So that's why algorithms in themselves have been found to be institutionally racist because they're built by people and
who live in a society
that are racist, that's institutionally racist. So it's not the individual that makes the biggest difference, it's the institution, and that's what we have to change. That's why we have to break down those institutional racist barriers, and or systemic, misogynistic barriers.
Yeah, and I feel like we are in the moment, so to speak, of this stuff now having to happen, right? Having to change. And I'm finding the experience with the response to Meghan Markle to be very a strong example of both the offline and online. We're looking at an institution that is at present sort of shielding an alleged pedophile, while simultaneously, who happens to be a white man, while simultaneously just eviscerating a black woman for having an opinion. When we're tackling this, should we be tackling it online and offline at the same time? Should they be happening in parallel? What's the approach? What's the approach to change?
It most definitely should be happening in parallel. Like when you run a computer programmer and you have parallel running, it should definitely be done in parallel. But the thing is this, what gets me about the Meghan Markle situation, let's call it, is that the way the royal family is dealing with this is to use a well-established racist trope against black women, which is calling a black woman a bully, to deal with it, to almost silence it. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, this is a trope that you're using, that you're amplifying to try and silence the voice of a black woman. And it's like, why would you do that if you're trying to prove that it's maybe you're not racist or it's an unconscious bias? Then deal with it. At the end of the day, we have to have the uncomfortable conversations. This is the only way we're going to move forward, is by having these uncomfortable conversations.
Well, and I think that's a really important point, the idea of it being an uncomfortable conversation, right? Because what I've found is it's primarily an uncomfortable conversation for white people, because particularly straight white men, because it normal in the world, right, is straight white male reality. And so adversity feels way more cutting to that group, especially online. I'm a gay man, you get used to some level of bullying. Any form of minority leads you to sort of building a thicker and thicker skin. But how do we get these people to understand that the scale of this problem, that actually, harm to anyone is harm to everyone?
So, I'm hoping that the pandemic, in a way, is getting people to sort of remodel their minds, to understand that nobody's safe until everybody's safe. So unless you're going to cocoon yourself in your home for the rest of your lives and don't leave the house or talk to anybody,
which nobody wants.
Yeah,
we're all craving.
Don't let anyone in, and you don't go out. Nobody's safe until everybody's safe, right? So I'm hoping with that kind of thought process that we'll be beginning to see change. Because at the end of the day, it's interesting that the protected characteristics, and people are protected for a reason. They're protected because they've been abused, as women, as black people, as LGBTQI plus community. That's why they are a protected characteristic. And it's like, if you're not part of that group, then be an ally. And if you are one of the protected characteristics, be an ally to one of the others. And in fact, it's more empowering when you are an ally to somebody. I find it way more empowering fighting somebody else's battles than having to fight my own, because that exhausts me.
Well, and it's so personal, right?
Exactly. It just takes a bit of you away, whereas you can fight for somebody else's battles. For me, it energizes me.
Well, Dawn, thank you so much for chatting to me about this.
Well done on your book.
Oh, thank you very much. So to really break down all this stuff, this complex stuff, the internet tracking you, following you, cookies, and really help you understand sort of how it all works. We did a little explainer video earlier in the week to give you a sense of what happens right when you start the journey from a Google search right through to basically the whole internet knowing everything about you. So enjoy it. All right, so I'm sure all of you have heard a lot lately about data, your data, what's happening to it online, where is it all going in this whole information and online ecosystem. So I thought I'd talk you through something, where it can go from a simple Google search all the way through to basically giving up all the information about you online. So we're going to start with Google, and we'll start with the Chrome browser where you might have logged in. And the reason we're starting with Google is because 92% of all searches in the UK are done on Google. That's why we say Google it and not Bing it or DuckDuckGo it. Now, on Google, you type into the search box, let's say you're looking for a new lamp. Okay, new lamp. The other thing we know about search is that 3/4 of the time, people don't look past the first page of results. So basically, your entire internet experience is going to start with this first page of search results for new lamp. And you might have little ads on the top for buy me, buy me, buy me. You might also have, for example, let's say a review on the Guardian website. So you say, okay, I'm gonna go to the Guardian website first, and I'm gonna read more about this lamp. But before you can read about the lamp, you get that box, right? And it says, we use cookies on this site. Now, do you want to accept all the cookies? Or do you want to manage your choices? Now, first, what's quite interesting is how boring managing my choices sounds, right? As opposed to just clicking accept, right? So you click accept. Now, what you've done by clicking accept is actually give roughly 500 companies access to your use of what you do on the Guardian's website. Now, we're going to come back to those over here later. For now, let's just look at this Guardian review. So you've got a photo of the item and great little narrative, and oh, this item's great, you should definitely buy it. And you think, okay, I'm gonna click buy. Now by clicking buy, it takes you to Amazon. So now you're on the Amazon website and the item is there. But you think, you know what, before I buy this, I'm gonna see if I can watch a video about it. So you go back to that Google search and you click the YouTube link to a video review. So now you're on YouTube watching videos about this product. And oh, someone's raving, this lamp is great, it's modern, it's chic, look how great it looks in my room. And as soon as you finish watching that video, there's all this little autoplay, right? And before you know it, you're 7 videos in because you want to see this lamp? Oh, cool, look at this TV show about interior decoration. Oh, look at this celebrity that was on this TV show. Here's an interview with them somewhere else. You're in a YouTube rabbit hole, right? It's been 10 or 15 minutes. Finally, you think to yourself, oh, I forgot, I was trying to buy a lamp. So you go back to the Amazon website and you click buy. Well, now that you bought the lamp, you want to let people know, I bought this really cool lamp. So you take that and share it on your Facebook profile. But what do you see in your Facebook feed? Well, among all these stories of your friends, you see an ad for the exact lamp you were just shopping for, because that ad feed probably hasn't caught up yet to the fact that you've already bought it. But what you also see is that in your newsfeed is lots of pictures of your friends who have done up their house or redecorated. Because what's happening is all this activity is fueling the Facebook newsfeed and algorithm to drive content that relates to the thing that they mostly want you to do, which is click on an ad and buy something, right? So now you've shared that on Twitter and you think, oh, I still got this YouTube page open. You pop back to YouTube, and as these videos are going, you think, oh, my friends on Twitter would love that video. So you're on Twitter and you're sharing that. And what are you seeing in your Twitter feed? Oh my gosh, very similar stuff to what you're seeing in your Facebook feed, right? Ads for other houseware products. Now you bought a lamp. Hey, do you need a side table? Do you need a new sofa? Oh, and increasingly, each item is just that little bit more expensive, because if you spent 20 quid, now you'll probably be happy to spend 40 and then 80. And before you know it, in that day, you've redecorated an entire room. The other thing you see on Twitter is this really interesting thing you want to read more about. So what do? Well, you end up back on Google, searching for that thing and starting this whole ecosystem again. But wait, remember that little tick we did earlier to accept all choices? Well, what that's done is set little cookies, which track where you go, kind of like Hansel and Gretel, to roughly 500 companies. These companies are located all over the world. They're marketing companies, they're retargeting companies. third-party advertisers, right? And now that's going to influence every single thing you do online. If one of those companies sells the ad space for another website, you're going to get ads based on everything you've done on the internet that's been sent to one of these companies and then driven to that site. All with one thing in mind, which is to sell you more stuff, right? All of these services I just described, save for when you've bought something, were free to use. And if something is free to use, that means you're the product. And the reason that's really, really bad is because you have no control over this process. You signed in here, you did a search there, and you ticked one box, and now 500 companies and this entire ecosystem follow you around the internet. Now you might be thinking, you know, the real issue here is privacy, and you're saying, well, I don't do anything wrong, it doesn't matter, who cares? The issue isn't simply that you don't have privacy anymore. The issue is who has access to your life as a result of this. Maybe one of these companies is in a country where the government requires them to report the data they've collected on different people. Now a country has data on you, right? It's pernicious, and it's not like taking a physical object, you know? I have this pen here. It's either here or it's here. Your data can be replicated 1,000,000 times over, transferred anywhere in the world in the blink of an eye. And so your digital you is no longer yours. It belongs to this infrastructure, this ecosystem, and this oligopoly of companies. Now, I don't know about you, but that scares me to death.
If you are enjoying tonight's show, then do consider subscribing to the Byline TV channel. We're not funded by media barons or oligarchs, so we all need to chip in together and fund an alternative to the right-wing media dominating this country. So you can do that at patreon.com/Byline TV. And if you do subscribe, you get added benefits like the exclusive Q&A that's going to be coming up at the end of the show for our subscribers. Fantastic Dawn Butler will be here for that, as will Kyle. So please do consider subscribing to us if you like what we do. Kyle, we're going to be talking about your book, which is launching today. Very exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But just before we do that, you're going to talk to an exciting guest, looking at some of these issues around the US of data, democracy, and big tech.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, we're really, really fortunate to have Jesse Lerick, who's the co-founder of Accountable Tech, one of the leading tech regulation NGOs in the United States, who was also the former foreign policy spokesperson for Hillary Clinton. Jesse, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with where I start in the book, which is the first big disinfo madness around Pizzagate and Hillary Clinton, the idea that she was running a child prostitution ring from the basement of a bar in Northwest Washington, D.C., a building that does not even have a basement, that actually led to a person coming to and shooting up the bar, attempting to, quote, free the children. I'm wondering, what was it like to be in that world, in that space, around this person that the world sort of decided to destroy online? What was the experience of being in that sort of inner circle?
It was surreal, definitely. I mean, on the one hand, you know, since she had been dealing with these kinds of disinformation and character smear campaigns for 40 years, you know, I think she was better adjusted for it than anyone could have been. On the other hand, it was, you know, horrifying to see the things that were happening online and the just total, like, departure from reality, you know? So, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about. I just remember seeing the guy that had gone to storm the basement, and he was just so shocked that there weren't children in the basement that didn't exist, you know. And that was my big takeaway was, you know, and this is not just a joke, or, you know, like he truly believed that he was going to uncover that there.
Well, and I think, and that's such an important theme about what happens online, right? The idea that somehow it exists outside of reality, when the real harm is caused when that online stuff filters into the offline space and leads to real world violence. what I can seem to be unable to wrap my head around, and was one of the main reasons that I wrote this book, is why it's so difficult to explain to people or get people to understand that this is happening. With your work and in the space that you're in, I'm wondering, what you see as the biggest hurdles to getting a public to fully understand the scale of the threat posed by social media and the online space.
Yeah, it's such an important question. It is this bizarre disconnect where, whether it's harassment or extremism or whatever it is, there are just things that we've just accepted online that we would never accept in the offline world. At the same time, I think that, you talked about real world violence and the manifestation of what's happening in the online world. I do think that in the US, what happened on January 6th at the Capitol was a real turning point where it became suddenly very, very real for a lot of people that hadn't quite made the connection about just how direct the ties can be between what's happening online and what the consequences of that can be in the real world. So I think in the worst possible way, but perhaps we made, silver lining, made some progress on breaking down that barrier there.
Well, I definitely think it resonated here as well, even in the UK on January 6th. And I mean, it's a type of moment where, do you remember exactly where you were as you watched the Capitol being sort of invaded? And I think it's one of those life moments. Speaking of who sort of accepted at that moment that this is a real threat, I mean, I think perhaps the most important audience would be U.S. legislators. Do you think being that close to the impact of online harm is going to ultimately help the cause of regulation?
I do think so. I mean, there's something very different between, this abstract threat for people and the experience of hiding in a closet in the Capitol, wondering if you're going to make it through the evening. So I do think that it was a game changer here. I mean, that's not to say we don't still have an enormous number of hurdles to get past, but I do think it was a moment where lawmakers in particular, got the picture that this was nothing we could continue putting off. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
That's a great headspace to be in. I want to come to your upcoming campaign in just a second. One of those audiences I think that's so important to help educate are just the general public. And part of it for me is because this tech stuff has happened so quickly and it is so complicated that for most of the public it seems to have been sold as don't worry about the details, leave it to us, it'll just be more convenient and everything will be easier, you'll have more information. In looking at the way that we get these ideas across to people, the way that we can educate and inform the public, what do you find are the most useful and effective tools?
Well, and not to blow smoke, but I will say, one of the things I think is so brilliant about your book is that you've lowered the barrier to entry, and you've hit the nail on the head that I think that there's a vested interest in sort of the Silicon Valley elite, creating this image that you wouldn't understand, and it's all very complicated, and there's a whole lexicon associated with it, whether it's real-time bidding or cookies or whatever it is. They've created these barriers to entry, and what you did so perfectly in this book is if you just have to explain it to people in normal language, and it becomes so much easier to understand. Oh, that's pretty messed up. Oh, they're tracking me all around the internet. Oh, they're using that to, sell my attention, my profile, my behaviors to advertisers for corporate benefit, And so I think we just need to continue to do exactly what you did in this book and exactly what we're trying to do, which is just, level with people and not try to hide behind this notion that there's some, super sophisticated Silicon Valley code that can't be understood by normal people.
Yeah, and let's get to that now. So here in the UK, we have a process about to start with the Online Harms Bill, which is focused on effectively social media and internet regulation. We're looking at obviously illegal content, but the real crux of this bill is around legal but harmful content. And we're looking at who does it harm, individuals versus society and so forth. I know that you're really paving the way in the US at Accountable Tech around these issues, and there's a campaign about to launch there as well, is that right?
Yes, we are gearing up for something I'm super excited about that I think we've managed to bring together sort of disparate pieces of the tech reform advocacy world, from privacy to antitrust to civil rights. And it's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, one of the things we want to do, as you know, here in the US, the First Amendment can be a bit of a hurdle when it comes to tackling specific speech questions around, sort of the lawful but awful type content that you're describing. But one of the things that we're trying to do to sort of get around that is to take direct aim at the business model. Because to me, the problem here is not just all of these awful things being posted online, right? But it's that the platforms and the algorithms that they've built in service of this surveillance capitalism, business model are proactively amplifying the worst content on the platform because it's engaging. It's not just that there's bad stuff on the platform, but the algorithm is serving as, a recruiter for QAnon or extremist groups. They say, oh, you like wellness, I bet you'd like anti-vax content. Oh, you like anti-vax content, have you heard of QAnon? And so to me, that's it's just even more nefarious than failing to moderate bad content, but they're proactively promoting and profiting off of it. And so that's what we want to take direct aim at.
Well, and they do that, right? Because they're neutral in terms of what the content is. For them, it's just about, is it engaging? Are we making more money? I always think about if it bleeds, it leads, the sort of historic notion around the press. And I wonder the pernicious nature of that on social media, because it is so personalized, it is so customized, and it is so built on fueling feelings regardless of fact. So, I can't think of a better time to be raising these issues. What's the campaign? When does the campaign launch? Where can people find out about it? And what can people do to support?
Yeah, thanks so much. I don't want to scoop myself too much, but we'll be launching it on Monday, and taking direct aim at surveillance advertising, which I think is the monetization of this business model, the engagement economy, and the degree to which we're being tracked and pushed content that, as you say, everything's so hyper personalized and all for corporate benefit. So I'd say stay tuned. We will be rolling out a big coalition on Monday ahead of Zuckerberg and co. are virtually coming back to the Capitol to atone for their sins at the Capitol at a hearing on next Thursday. And so ahead of that, on Monday, we'll be rolling out this surveillance advertising campaign, and I'm excited for folks to see it.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Jesse, for being here and for all this hard work. It is a tough space when you're going up against the largest, wealthiest corporations on the planet. So keep it up.
Thanks so much for having me, and congrats on the amazing book.
Thank you. All right. That was great.
Yeah, well, this issue of accessibility, Carl, is so key, isn't it? I mean, if citizens don't even know where to start with understanding big data and big tech, big data, I mean, that is very damaging to democracy. But so your book, The Little Black Book of Data and Democracy, published by Byline Books, is out today, right? So Kyle, tell me, where did this book come from?
It came from, I've been working in this space for a long time as a practitioner. I thought this stuff was going to revolutionize politics. It meant we could reach more voters, increase engagement. And unfortunately, what we saw was the same thing we see with most things, which is it ultimately became a consolidation to a few companies, incentivizing a few powerful voices. And a few years ago, I was privileged enough to be part of the campaign that followed Chris Wiley's whistleblower revelations around Cambridge Analytica, their work with the Trump campaign, and Vote Leave, the largest law-breaking in...
Just for those who may not know, Cambridge Analytica was this data analytics firm, which...
Yeah, so Cambridge Analytica was a data analytics firm that used an app called, a quiz on Facebook called This Is Your Digital Life. And by taking that quiz, you gave them the ability to take all of your data from Facebook, everything you liked, everything you shared, all your friend lists.
Yeah.
Crucially, what this app also did was it took all the data of every friend you have on Facebook without their consent.
Yeah.
And this was, in total, at least 87 million people around the world had their data taken without their consent.
And it allowed Cambridge Analytica to build up a pretty good picture of these people, right?
Yeah, and with that many people, you can profile the planet. That's just, that's the reality of this. And when the story went public, I genuinely thought that it would take 3 months, we'd be having emergency debates in Parliament, and we'd be passing laws to fix this stuff, because we're talking about the largest data theft in the history of politics. Instead, here we are 3 years later, no significant laws have been changed in any major developed democracies. And what I realized was the real problem was that this stuff is so complicated. And there's somehow like an incentive in making it more inaccessible, because it makes people feel like they're somehow smarter, because I'll use big words to explain this, and that way, it'll also give me some sense of power over you because I understand it and you don't. And it was really centered around my dad. My dad, who, with the beginning, used to think that the icon on his desktop with eBay.com, because he sells stuff on eBay, was eBay. Understanding that you can type an address into a bar and it goes here, and the idea of cooking, all of this was so complicated. And I thought, okay, I have got to find a way to explain this so that my dad can understand the threat it poses. And if my dad can understand it, hopefully anyone can. And that's what I've tried to do. I mean, it's a handbook. It's short. It's accessible. It uses normal human words and normal human language.
Always a good thing.
Lots of examples. Lots of humor, and it finishes with the most crucial piece, which is constantly missing in this stuff, which is what can we do about it?
Well, exactly, yeah.
So what the individual can do, so how you lock down your phone, how you make sure that the Facebook app or Instagram isn't constantly listening through the microphone on your phone, which it is, but instead, and not just that, but then what you can do about systemic change. So how do we fix this? How do we fix data rights for people? How do we rebalance this dynamic where a company controls every single thing you place on their platform, on their website? How do we fix democracy? And then ultimately, why is this so important? And for me, it's that social media is fragmenting society in a way that we have not seen in a generation. And yet every major threat posed to us as a species, as humans, are threats that will only have solutions if we work together. Climate change being the largest among them. It requires collaboration, it requires understanding, but it requires the idea of a shared reality. We all have to be living in the same world to solve the problems in it.
Absolutely. And Kyle, where can people find your book?
So you can pre-order littleblackdatabook.com, published by Byline Books, who have been amazing and so supportive.
Yeah, we also have a publishing arm.
Yeah, and exactly. I also have a publishing arm.
Peter Jukes tells me it's Byline Airlines next, but I don't know, he's joking.
And you'll see on the website as well the scale of endorsements and support for the book from MPs of every party in the UK, right through to the director of the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma.
That's really impressive.
So, if you just want to get into this, understand it in a way that you're not made to feel stupid for not getting it to start with, this is the place to start.
Oh, that's really good, Kyle. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's been great to have you.
Fun.
Great
Who
to learn
needs
about
Peter,
you.
right?
Oh, don't let him hear you say that. But a big thank you to everyone who's watched tonight's show, and a big thank you to all of those who already support us on Patreon. As I said earlier, if you fancy chipping in to help us change the mainstream media in this country, please do. We can only build all these alternatives together. It's patreon.com/Byline TV. There's a Q&A coming up for those of you who do subscribe. As I said, Dawn Butler's back. Kyle will still be in the chair, and we'll be looking at all the questions we haven't been able to cover now. Peter Jukes will be back next week. He'll be drinking his jug of Guinness and using swear words. I also want to end the show by giving a shout out to Byline Times' other executive editor and a director of Byline TV, Stephen Colgrave. Have a great weekend, everyone. See you next week.
Bye.